Hello everyone. It's going to be an intro video to discuss kind of why and how we're going to use Rhino for inlay work. So first I'm just going to show you kind of an overview of what a finished file is going to look like and why we have the elements that we have, and then we're going to go through it from the ground up in a little bit more detail. So it's pretty typical to start with some sort of image that you're going to trace, or you're going to get the gist of it, or you're going to modify, but definitely not required, but generally you'll be starting with some sort of picture. On the next layer, we're going to sort of trace out what we want our inlay to look like. And as you can see, we can kind of take liberties. We can do whatever we want. We do not have to match the picture. In fact, sometimes the picture will be off to the side, just sort of inspiring what you're initially drawing in Rhino. Next thing we're going to do is apply numbers to each part. Once we're staring at a pile of puzzle pieces that, just have a piece of paper stuck to them, it's going to be really helpful to know which part is which and which goes where, and really easy to get confused if you have, a 100-piece inlay and they're not numbered, so numbers are going to be essential. Another little thing that's just so easy to do, you may as well do it in Rhino, is to apply lines that represent which way you want the grain to flow. This is really easily done in Rhino, and it's purely an aesthetic decision, but in my mind this inlay is going to look lousy if, for example, all of these large petals were cut out of one piece of wood as they are here. That is, if the grain was running horizontally through all of these pieces, it is not going to look as nice as if the grain was flowing out from the center on all these pieces. And for these central pieces, just for contrast, the grain is going to kind of flow in a circle. It's something that's really easy to do in Rhino, and it really makes your final inlay stand out as really eye-catching and nice, and very much like an image, and less like a chunk that was just sort of plopped in there. So once we have this drawn basically the way we want it, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the picture there. You'll notice that these curves are just drawn in a way that's convenient. They look right, but they do not describe the parts or the pieces, the closed curves that we're going to need to deal with. So the next thing we're going to make are what I call parts, or closed curves. So this is one closed curve. This is one path of your jeweler's saw blade that's going to describe this entire part. So you can see that our whole image has kind of been broken into its subsequent parts now. And from there we have everything that we need. This is what we're actually going to print. So this is the size of printer paper, and you'll notice that all of these parts have kind of been grouped by species and oriented such that this whole piece right here can be glued down onto your piece of walnut, for example. This whole piece here can be glued down onto your piece of maple, for example, with the grain running parallel to the grain orientation line. So when you cut out all these pieces, the grain is just going to work out such that it aligns with your thoughts on the aesthetics of which way the grain should flow. And these pieces were intended to be metal, so they don't have any grain orientation lines, and it's always a good idea. In fact, it's pretty easy to forget to print kind of the master, the whole image intact, because otherwise you're just going to be looking at a pile of these parts on the ground and on your bench, and you won't know how they actually fit together. You won't know which one goes with which, so having all this stuff printed out is going to save you a ton of time. And we won't cover it in this video, but this is what I will refer to as rendering. So this is where we actually apply some material to an inlay, and this is incredibly handy, and believe it or not, it's actually not that hard to do. So this is a great planning aid. You can come in and put this species next to that species and decide, that's not enough contrast, I want something to be a little bit different. Maybe instead of this being aluminum, I want it to be brass. You can switch all that stuff up. And in my mind, the single most important thing about this is its effectiveness as a sales tool. Whether you're doing an inlay or a piece of furniture or anything, if you can just quickly apply some materials to that, it's can make a world of difference if you're trying to convince someone to commission your services and get paid for work. describing how things are going to be with hand motions, or showing them a picture of wood on your phone, or a napkin sketch of, yeah, there'll be brass here and the brass is going to look great next to this other species. That just pales in comparison to showing them really a lifelike sort of representation, a render of this is how it's going to be. Do you like this species? Do you want to switch it to that species? It's just it's incredibly easy and a very powerful tool to wield, so we're going to be covering that as well. So, how are we going to accomplish all these things? Here we are kind of at step number 1. I like to start with a template file that already has some of the settings that I prefer. The mid, near, and end O-snaps turned on, and all the layer names already kind of organized in the way that I like it. So something to kind of keep your eyes on in this video is the command bar. This is where I'm going to be typing in the names of the commands that I'm running. All the commands can be found if you remember what their logo looks like, or if you want to go and find them in one of the drop-downs. My strong preference, though, and I think one of the coolest things about Rhino, is the fact that you can just type in a command, circle. Yep, circle is a command. And then you can go over to the Help tab and watch a video on the circle command, how it works, different options that you can take advantage of when drawing a circle. And if that's not exactly the command you are looking for, you can scroll to the bottom of all this helpful stuff for drawing circles, and it will show you other commands that are similar. And this really sets Rhino up to teach itself to you. If you think you want to squish something, you can just sort of type in the word squish. Yeah, squish is a command, and we can watch a video of squish. That happens to be a really advanced command, and like, oh man, it's close, but it's not quite what I was hoping squish would do. Smash. There's another command, and we can watch a video on that. So this is a pretty marvelous way that Rhino can kind of teach itself to you. If you're ever wondering why a command isn't working, or if you need it to run in some specific way, the Help tab over here to the right of the Layers tab is just going to be absolutely fantastic. So don't hesitate to guess and type in a command you think might be good, and then watch the help on it and get directed from there. Also, if you ever find yourself really frustrated at why Rhino's just not working, why isn't it doing what I expected it to, most questions in Rhino, it's actually kind of amazing how many questions and frustrations I can address in class in Rhino simply by saying, look at the command bar, look up here, because oftentimes it will be telling you what it needs, and you might have to give it a number. It might be telling you have to select the object that you want to run that command on, so get that mantra in your head. If you're frustrated and you're wondering why the heck it's not doing what you expected, the answer likely lies up in the command bar. It needs some other bit of information from you, or it's already in the middle of doing something else. So we have the picture layer as our active layer with this check mark here. For your information, left click is going to be red and right click is going to be blue. And I will be sure to mention if I'm doing any shortcut keys on the keyboard. So the first thing we want to do, I've got a flower image that I just found online and I saved it. I choose to save pictures by the same name that the Rhino file will have, and I'll save them in the same location, and that just is going to make everything easier to keep track of. So my picture layer is the active layer. It's got the check mark here. That means anything that I create is going to go to the layer where that check mark is. And I'm going to type in the word picture. That's going to take me into the picture command. And I just need to go and find the image that I wanted to start from, and I like this flower, so we're going to go there. And at this point you may be wondering, well, why didn't the picture come through? What is the deal there? Is Rhino crashed? What's going on? It needs something from me. I have to tell it the first corner of the picture. And I'm not real particular about where I drop it, but I'm just going to kind of pull this thing up and to the right, and that will keep it from becoming flipped upside down or inside out. So there we go. We have a picture dropped into that space. It lives on the picture layer. If I want to turn off the visibility of that to see what I've got drawn, I can. If I want to, notice how I can select this and move it around by left-clicking and holding. If I want to prevent accidentally dragging this around once I start tracing on it, I can lock that layer. So I can see it, I can refer to it, I can draw over the top of it, but I won't be at risk of scooting it around by mistake. Other things we can do with this image selected, If I come to find that I am really struggling to see lines on here, if we select this image and then go to the Properties tab, we can do things like change its brightness and change its transparency. And that might make it easier to trace on. So that looks pretty reasonable to me. So I've got that placed. In the interest of showing you more commands, we can do this step later, but we'll go ahead and just do it now. I dropped the size of this image pretty randomly. In this template file, I have set up the major grid lines, the dark grid lines, are 1 inch, and the minor grid lines, the lighter gray, 1/4 inch. So we have 4 1/4 inches and 1 inch. I still don't exactly know how big that is. I'd be curious to know, so I can enter the distance command. Just type in the word distance, hit enter, and I'll just take my crosshairs and click from corner to corner. And the number that pops up here in the command bar, so that's set to be 9 inches. That's way, way bigger than I want. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you the scale command, and we'll deal with the size now, even though you can do it later. So I'm going to type in the word scale. And Rhino needs to know, what objects do you want to scale? I'll select this image. Rhino also needs to know that that's the only thing I want to scale, so I need to either hit enter or I will oftentimes just right click. Right clicking is kind of synonymous with hitting the enter key. So now it's saying the base point of my scaling. This is something where we can go and watch a video on how scaling works and ways to deal with it, but if in scale I go ahead and click here, this is my second reference point, left click here, and I want that to be 2 inches across. I'll literally just type in 2, hit enter. I can confirm that that's now 2 inches across if I want by using the distance command. From there to there, mighty close to 2. So this image is good, it's at the right size, and we're going to go ahead and move forward with tracing it. So I need to make my tracing layer the active layer. Not helpful to be drawing curves on top of the picture on that very same layer. And in the interest of not scooting this thing around by mistake, I'm going to go ahead and lock the picture layer. So there's lots of ways of drawing lines and curves in Rhino. If you left click and hold up here, you'll see lots of fancy options for drawing straight lines. Single lines, polylines, lines from midpoints, all sorts of fancy stuff. Here we have drawing curves. So my favorite one, and I would encourage you to play around, is the second one called Interpolate Curve. Anytime you find a command here that you like, and you just make a note of what its name is, if I escape out of this command just by hitting the escape key, if I type in int, Rhino knows that I use this command quite a bit, so int, it sort of predicts interp curve is what I want, and I'll get in there. If you're an Adobe Illustrator user, the handle curve is synonymous with the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator, just so you're aware. But my preference is the interpolated curve. I always find that to be just the fastest and the most accurate. And as you can see, I'm going to kind of have to take some liberties here. Sometimes images are fuzzy, or they describe a part that's going to be just ridiculously fragile, and I don't want to mess with it. So I'm going to kind of just come in and say, you know, that's the center, and I'm going to follow one of these petals out. So I'm just going to left click at every place that I want this line to pass through, and it will sort of do what it can to keep that line really smooth and fair. The more points I use, the more accurate I'll say the line will be. The fewer points, the more fair the curve will be. If you accidentally put a point where you didn't want it, or if you come to find you don't like the way that point is influencing lines previous, don't hit escape, or that will delete all the points and you'll exit the command. If I do a Control-Z and undo, I'll delete just the last point. And you know what, I didn't like the last two, so we'll just go ahead and continue following this around. This can be an awkward moment here because, you know, the tip of that flower is pretty pointy. Rather than try to do one of these numbers where you make like a bunch of points to try to describe a corner, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and right click to end the command. It will just end it at your last point. And a cool thing is going to happen, and I would encourage you to kind of get in the habit of doing this. anytime you hit the enter key or the right click button on the mouse, you will automatically just jump right into the same command that you used previously. So we're back in the curve, and I can simply start another curve from this point and just carry on, and it's a really 2 right clicks will end the curve, begin a new curve, and you can make a sharp corner really fast and easy. So I'm going to show you something here that's going to be really important. Notice that word end is popping up. This is an object snap in action, and we definitely need to see this happening. It may seem like it's not a big deal now, but subsequent commands will crash if, for example, I'm going to forget to have OSnap turned on. And like, it's pretty close, I'll just zoom in. I'll zoom in a little further. There's an interesting paradox here that happens where there is no eyeballing this thing to be perfectly in contact with that end, and that will make, even if the gap between the two line ends is 1/1000th of an inch, and it doesn't matter in real life, the computer will not be happy about those lines not truly being in contact with one another. So don't do the trickery where you're zooming in forever thinking you're going to truly put it in the right spot. Put all that work on Rhino, have your object snaps turned on, and we want an end snap, and you'll notice that word end pops up when we're even in the vicinity. That will be truly and utterly touching. The ends of the lines will be touching, and that's what we're going to need for subsequent commands. If you want to snap to something and it's just not working, play around with some of these other ones. You can snap to the center of a circle, you can snap to a point that you've dropped. Lots of cool ways of snapping. Conversely, if you're trying to click on something and some snap keeps pulling you aside and it's annoying you, like, man, I do not want to be snapping to that, just observe the word that you see pop up. That's the snap you want to just go and turn off, and you'll stop getting that annoying snapping when you don't want it. So I'm going to go ahead and go in fast motion here and trace out this whole flower, making sure that all of my lines are truly touching each other, and just taking liberties wherever I want in terms of, I don't even really know what's going on in here, so I think I'll just kind of have everything come to a sharp point in the middle. So I've got this all traced out. At any point I can go ahead and turn off the visibility of the pick layer and just kind of make sure I like the way things are coming together. Something I might have caught earlier, this is kind of a reddish flower, so maybe it's a little bit annoying to trace a red line on it. I can just go to my tracing layer, click the colored box there, and change that to, but that's pretty easy to see. I'm going to go with dark blue. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I did make sure that my O-snaps were turned on and I was getting things truly kind of touching where they ought to. And from a design standpoint, I will mention that this right here is going to be a little bit frustrating. I had a bad feeling when I was doing this, but it's one of those things that you'll learn kind of what you like and what you don't. It's going to be interesting to have 5 leaves, two parts per, so 10 parts all coming together and meeting at a common center. That's generally something I would avoid, but just in the sake of getting a sense of doing inlay work, we're going to go ahead and just leave that. So now we're ready to make what I call parts. And parts are going to be kind of special because they can be dragged away and they describe the closed curve that's around each component that the jeweler saw is going to cut out. So again, this looks good. I'm happy with the way everything is. If I come to find that like I don't like this bump here, I can just select a line and manipulate it in any way that I want. So don't be shy about coming back and changing things. But I'm going to assume everything looks good. However, these are not parts. They're just kind of sporadic lines all over the place. They were convenient to draw, but they are not going to be easy to break apart into, this is going to be a light colored wood and maybe this will be metal, that kind of thing. So we need to make some parts. I'm going to expand the parts layer. And I'm going to go ahead and, at this point, if I knew I wanted it to be walnut and brass, I could layer my numbers, or I could layer my parts that way. I could name my layers that way. I'm just going to go ahead and put light. I think these big ones are going to be light colors. dark, and background is going to be this stuff out here. So on that note, I need to give myself a background. I'm just going to enter the rectangle command. This is still on the tracing layer, and give myself a background. I'm not gonna sweat the size of this too much. This is just kind of to make things easier in the future. So I'm ready to go ahead and select my light parts. If I get confused on what should be what, I can always turn my picture layer back on and go, yeah, I'm going to disregard the picture here, and I'm going to have this be metal, and this is going to be some light colored species of wood, and maybe my background will be dark. I'm going to turn that back off. I'm going to make my light parts layer the active layer, and I'm going to enter the curve boolean command. CURVEBOOLEAN. And it's predictive. Anytime you see the blue up here in the command bar, that's letters I haven't typed in yet, but it's trying to do me a favor. I do not need to type in the entire command. If the right one pops up predictively, I can go ahead and just hit enter. This is a command that is really awesome and also causes some frustration until you get a feel for it. There's a video and little helpful hints over here in the help tab. Basically, it's going to let us make parts. If you notice what's going on here, a circle was drawn, a hexagon, a rectangle. The curve boolean command is going to come in and let us sort of select regions. Notice how they're pulling that one region away as a part. This is absolutely everything that we need. So it's kind of it's a bunch of commands in one. It will trim, it will make copies, it will join curves. It does a lot of cool stuff all at once, but it can be a little bit frustrating. So I'm in the command. First thing it's going to ask me is select curves. I'm going to go ahead and just select all the curves. Delete input, none. I don't want to delete anything on my tracing layer. Combine regions, no, because I want all these to be distinct regions. And if I just click on this, I'll change it from yes to no. And outputting curves is completely fine. So I have crosshairs now. It's going to tell me to click inside of which regions I want. I'm on light parts as my active layer, so I'm going to come in and just click inside of each one of my light parts. So if I hit enter or right click, the command is going to go ahead and execute. I've found it to be a good practice to just be sure before you sort of pull the trigger on the curve boolean command, make sure that a parts layer is active. It is a recipe for frustration and annoyance and making a mess if you complete the curve boolean command while the tracing layer is active. You want all of the products of the curve boolean command to be going to parts layers. So light parts is active. I have all my light parts selected. I'll right click. At this point, it can be really tempting to feel like, well, nothing happened. Like, it's all still the same. This pops up, and that means that it doesn't know what you're selecting. There are two things underneath the point that you're clicking. A good thing to do to just kind of confirm, did we just do what we expected? Did we get all the parts that we wanted? Turn off the tracing layer. And sure enough, those are all of my light parts. That's exactly what I wanted, so that's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and make dark parts active, turn off light parts, turn back on tracing. I just typed in CUR and it knows I want curve boolean, so I'll hit enter. It remembers all the settings I had last time, so I'm not combining regions. I need to select all the curves, right click, and now I'm going to click inside of all my quote-unquote dark parts. Make sure I've got them all. Even in the middle of a command, I can come in and go, yep, that's all the dark parts. Everything's looking good. And I'm going to just confirm real quick before I pull the trigger here with the right click that I am set to output this stuff to the dark parts layer. Turn off tracing. There we go. We now have parts. So we've gone from this sort of disparate curves that aren't connected and that doesn't really make sense, and anytime you have two parts next to each other, that's a shared curve. So this curve needs to be the lower part of this part and also the upper part of this part here. So curve boolean command, as obnoxious as it is to learn, it's fantastic. It just took care of everything. Everything is true to our design. However, now we have parts that can be taken away. Let's go ahead and put some grain orientations on here. So I'm going to put grain orientation layer as active. I like the line command for this. Just type in the word line. If I want to, I can refer back to the picture. And in my mind, this grain definitely wants to be flowing in this direction. So I'm right-clicking, left-clicking to give the first point, left-clicking to give the next point, right-clicking to get into the command again. And I know these pieces are going to be a little bit fragile and frustrating, so I'm just going to plan for them to be metal, so they don't need a direction like the wooden pieces will. Let's go ahead and deal with our numbers next. So I'm going to enter the text command. How tall I want my text? I'm going to make it about a 1/16 tall. And I'm just going to type in the letter 1 for now. The number 1 for now. Okay, so that didn't work. There we go. It doesn't really matter what you number, as long as you kind of number every single part. So I right-clicked to get back into the command, and I'll just type 2. Right-click, 3. I don't want any of these numbers to be crossing the line, because that's going to be a cut line later, and I want to have it be unobstructed when I'm following it with my jeweler's saw. So the next thing we're going to kind of head towards, this needs to be disassembled. If you remember that other file I showed you, we need to set up a print layer. So we've got it all designed, now we need to actually output what we're going to print onto paper, and we're going to stick onto our actual pieces of wood. So we're ready to set up to make what we're actually going to print out and use to cut to. And that means we're going to need to start disassembling this flower. There's a big opportunity for error here that I'm just going to emphasize to show you how to avoid it. What we've created thus far, the picture with the tracing on top of that, with the parts on top of that, I'm going to refer to this as the master. We do not want to disrupt this. It's very tempting, and you'll kick yourself later to say, hey, it's done, and take it away and start, disassembling it and lose everything that you've made here. So we're going to make some copies. We never want to disrupt the picture with the tracing with the parts on top of it. We're going to use that later on in the process, and you will just have to redo that work if you drag this away and take it apart. Leave a copy of this here. So I'm going to enter the copy command, select the objects to copy, right click, and I'm just going to right click to end the command. I've got 2 copies over here. What this is going to be is one copy that becomes kind of the key for reassembling these pieces. The other copy we're going to disassemble. So the next thing we need to do, and it's pretty easy to start selecting stuff, and oh, I just lost that 5. And we're going to be moving and grooving and rotating and packing these parts together like sardines just to maximize our yield out of a given piece of material. So we're going to want to form some groups. I'm going to select, just by left clicking and holding shift, the curve, or the part, its orientation line, and its number, and I'm just going to type in the group command. Doesn't look like anything happened, but when I click on this now, it all gets selected, and if I go to drag it away, this is one part that's not going to lose its little important bits of information. So I just noticed I failed to make a number 10. However, we can save this. Select it, copy. This would seem to be sort of a good datum to copy from. Yeah, somehow I had it over there. There we go. So I'll select that curve, that number, group, pull it away. I can start to drag a box here, just make sure I'm careful about what I'm selecting. The last command I ran was group, so if I right click, I just grouped that. I can sort of put it in a pile with its fellow species of the same color, parts of the same species maybe. So I'm right clicking every time my selection is on just an appropriate group that I want, just one part, its number, and its corresponding grain orientation line. If you ever came to find that you accidentally included two parts into a group, or you stole the number out of one and put it in the wrong group, just select that group and use the ungroup command. Just type in ungroup. Don't need to do anything up here. I just need to disassemble one. So you can see the grain is flowing in every which way. In the interest of not having to cut these out individually and glue this one down parallel to the grain of the wood, this one down by rotating it parallel to the grain of the wood, we're just going to do all that work in Rhino. So I will use the rotate command. Select this group to rotate, press enter when done, and I'm just going to click here, click there, and if I hold shift, it will snap me to being perfectly horizontal. Select, right click to get back into rotate, left click, hold shift, left click again. So these pieces are going to be metal, so they don't have any orientation. However, this current arrangement is going to waste a ton of metal, so I'm going to do something similar with them, just in the interest of not having a ton of sort of wasted material in between them. Just going to kind of pack them together pretty closely. I'm leaving a good solid 1/16 of an inch or so there to make sure I have plenty of room to go through with the jeweler's saw. I should put these pieces real close together as well. So now is a pretty good time to talk about the stock layer you may have noticed over here. So my intention with the stock layer is that you would, if this was going to be walnut, you decided, you would have a walnut stock layer. And if these pieces were going to be walnut, you would actually measure the piece of walnut that you have, just throw a ruler up to it, and if we come to find that the walnut is, let's say it's 2 inches by 4 inches. This would be a great time to figure out how you want to stack your parts together, so that's not looking too great. However, if I catch this in Rhino, I don't need to actually come through with a knife and carefully cut these apart and glue down 2 pieces of paper. I would just as soon sort of put it into a stack that works well with the material that I actually have. And you may come to find that your parts are too big and you have to switch to a different piece of stock. So yeah, that's going to be really handy. Just sort of quickly model, particularly if you're really trying to maximize how big of an inlay you're getting out of a really small piece of pearl or something like that. It's a really good idea to just draw your material that you're going to be working with and make sure that your parts are actually going to be able to fit on it and be cut out of it. So I'm going to turn off the stock layer. We're ready now to throw this onto our imaginary printer paper. So this is standard paper with the 1/2 inch margin all the way around it. You know, while we're talking about stock, I mentioned when we first scaled the picture, when we first brought it in, that, you know, we made this 2 inches, but you didn't have to do it at that point. You can totally do it at this point if, for example, you came to find that, like, oh man, I'm attached to using this piece of stock, and let's say these pieces are too big. You can scale stuff at this point. You just want to be careful that you scale everything, all the parts pertaining to the inlay, in one shot. So let's say we actually want to make this a different size. It's very important that I don't come in and, for example, only scale some of these parts. I will then make these parts at a different scale from everything else, and they will not fit together. So you can do it at this point. You just want to be careful. You know, make sure you don't like turn off some of your parts and forget to scale them. You want to do that command all in one shot on all of them. And to do that, we would just select them, get into scale. We could do this by eye to make it fit within our stock constraints if we have a piece of material we're attached to using. Or we could escape. We can do the same thing we did before where, you know, I want this thing to be exactly 2 inches across, and I got it close to 2 inches before, but now let's say it's really important. It's going on a banister that's exactly 2.5 inches wide, and I want a 1/4 inch gap on either side. From here to here. Again, all things selected, 2 inches. All right, we're ready to go. So what I like to do at this point, I would turn off the stock layer. You're welcome to print the stock layer if you like, but I generally don't. I'm going to just drop this onto the printer paper. And I've made a mental note that these pieces have to be arranged this way, but there's nothing that says I can't rotate that whole group 90 degrees. Maybe that lets me get more stuff on the page. Alright, so this is plenty of room. I'm going to go ahead and, you know, as long as I'm going to be spitting out a whole sheet of paper on the printer, these parts over here are pretty small. I'm going to just make a copy of them if I accidentally lose one or I mess one up, because they are pretty thin and pointy. I can use the copy command, a short key for that I find myself doing all the time. Select some objects, left click and hold. While you're still holding and you're in the process of dragging them, if you tap the Alt key, notice that plus sign that pops up there? That is a quick way to just drop a duplicate somewhere. So this collection is everything that I'll need to execute this inlay, including some backup pieces of my smaller ones. So I'm going to kind of squeeze it into the paper a little bit just to maximize it. And I'm going to rotate this. And as a final step, something I like to do, I'm going to make multiples of this just to really maximize how many samples of this inlay can be cut out. So my final step, my preference is to make all this stuff black. There's really no reason to be wasting the color of your on your printer with this stuff. So I'm just going to select all of my parts and my numbers and my grain orientation, and I'm just going to right click on the print layer and say change object layer. It's now all black. It now lives on that layer. I can now turn off the paper layer. No reason to be printing this border on my paper. Control P for print. I can also just type in the word print. And it will automatically kind of center it in the paper for me. Things to watch out for here, and this can really be a bear the first few times you use your printer before it can pick up on what your preferences are. Extents means it's going to go in the center, and this is a real nightmare if you get if your computer automatically does something funny for you here. Sometimes it will try to scale to fit. The only scale you ever want to see is 100%, 1:1. That means it will print at the same size that you drew it at. The nightmare scenario is that you print this at some funny scale and you never clicked in here and you don't know what that scale is. Your printer just made something up based on how big your pile was here. And then you lose a part and you have to come in and print it again. and the next time you're printing just that part and it prints at a different scale, and you now have puzzle pieces that do not play nice together. So good practice to get into, just to make sure, click the view output and scale and always confirm that that's a 1-to-1. Another thing that's going to vary printer to printer is going to be line types and widths. And on the school printer anyways, I've come to find 0.18 millimeters is a pretty decent line. It's not so thick that it's inaccurate, and it's not so fine that it's hard to see. You'll want to play around with that a little bit. I would probably rather have a line that's a little too big than a little too thick, rather than a little bit too small. And you'll just go ahead and print it. And if it comes out too faint, just flip that piece of paper over and try a different color, or try a different line weight. So I think that concludes everything I wanted to cover in this video. We are going to talk a lot more about rendering later, and other strategies for keeping things organized when you have a more complicated inlay. I know a lot of this might feel like overkill, particularly with this simple flower example. Like, man, you could probably tell which one of these pieces goes where. But I'm going to insist that you all lay out your files this way, just because it makes for files that you can troubleshoot problems in. You can go back and make a change to a design really easily. I can easily grade it because I know what's going on. The temptation, I know, because I've been there and I've felt it, is just to say, to hell with the layers, I'm just going to do some stuff and then just drag a copy off to the side, and then make some changes to it, and then drag another copy off to the side, and everything's on the same layer, and you don't know what is going on, what happened first, what happened second. It's just a nightmare, and I'll tell you, I spent many years working in Rhino in that sort of chaotic, just go, make copies over and over and over, never even opening the layers tab, and those files are nightmarish. I put a lot of work in that I can never really go back in and modify or take advantage of. So I am going to be pretty insistent that everything's organized this way. And yeah, once this comes out of the printer and it's looking good, these can be cut up and glued onto your material, and then those are our cut lines we're going to saw to, and then it's kind of back to the basics. We'll just be holding them up to each other, fitting them with a file, and onward and upward. Thank you for your time.